Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Greater Good. I'm just super excited today because I have a really interesting woman with us today, Dr. Kathleen Kiernan. She is president of NEC, National Security Systems, and she's just like a powerhouse. I mean, she is nationally recognized for her work in human trafficking and other very important security issues throughout the world, essentially. Hi, Dr. K. How are you today?
I'm great, and thank you so much. And actually, Jeff, you had me at the greater good, so you really did. So at your service.
And I just love your pink top there. I know why you wear pink throughout the month, but maybe you can tell us.
Well, certainly. October stands for a lot of things, but one of the things it is nationally recognized is breast cancer awareness. And that's a disease, not unlike in a sense, the disease of human trafficking, but it impacts generations of families, doesn't discriminate, and it impacts the globe. So it's just something that I have lost lots of friends and colleagues from, and I decided that this is something I could do. So this year will be my 18th walk, 60-mile walk that we'll be doing in Dallas next week to raise funds and raise awareness for the cure.
Wow, that's a great commitment for sure. You did stand out. Just full disclosure here, Dr. K and I attended the IACP conference in Dallas, Texas, just a couple of weeks ago, and that's the International Association of Chiefs of Police. And Dr. K stood out among everyone there. And I was told there were about 16,000 participants in that conference. And the reason she stood out, not only because she's an amazing person, but she had on the brightest pink shoes I have ever seen. I mean, I could spot you from a half a mile away in those great shoes, which is a smart thing to do, to wear at a conference where you're walking all day long.
Indeed.
Yeah, speaking of that, did you see that woman that had on those spiked high heels who was walking around at that conference?
I did. And you know, it's interesting on this walk. There'll probably be about 2,000 people in Dallas. You will see every variety of clothing and costuming and good cheer. You'll see every age, every weight, every denomination. When I started doing these, you would see maybe 50 men out of 2,000.
Yeah.
Now it's about half and half. It's
Is that right?
Oh, husbands and wives, fathers and daughters, fathers and sons, fathers and uncles and brothers and everyone. It's a universal cause.
Yeah, that's wonderful. It's like mad, moms against drunk drivers. Look at how they've progressed in very relatively short time frame. I mean, they've become a worldwide, comment. When you see those initials, you immediately know what it is, and hopefully, it'll have impact on people's driving behavior. Anyway, so tell us a little bit about national security systems. I think everyone knows who NEC is, that 125, 126-year-old amazing, large international corporation that's headquartered out of Japan. But tell me, what's the genesis of NSS?
Pretty close on the numbers there, Jeff. It's 123 years old this year, and actually started in 1899, where our founders worked with Thomas Edison. It was in the early days a communication company. And what I say is we're still at our base communications company, but we've just grown. Our marketing will tell you we do everything from undersea cables to satellites and everything in between. What attracted me to the company after careers in federal law enforcement and the intelligence community was the fact that they service the communities that I love the most, and that's law enforcement, intelligence, and the military. And probably more importantly to me was that they invest in the communities they service, and they solve global problems with the weight of that global company. And the global problems we're most focused on is countering human trafficking and homelessness. And both of those, as we know, are inextricably intertwined. Yeah. So to me, it was love at first sight. National security systems, which I have the pleasure of leading, is maybe the best way to describe it is the front end, where we mostly service federal government customers. Mm-hmm. So classified work, mostly classified.
So when you say service the federal or government sectors, are you speaking mostly about intelligence communities and law enforcement?
Federal law enforcement, the intelligence community, and the military. So if you think of agencies such as Customs and Border Protection, TSA, the Coast Guard, the Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines, National Guard,
Right.
those are the types of customers we work with.
So you're very, very well known within those communities and beyond that, for the work that NEC and its division that's headed up by you, and that's because you're out so much. I mean, you're the face of that entity essentially.
Well, Jeff, you're overly kind, but I have a fantastic team, and we invest in the communities that we work with. You can't drive business nor customer engagement from behind a desk. Have to go out and meet people and listen to their requirements. When I was in the government, and I progressed through the ranks. So I always, even though I retired at a very senior rank, I always introduced myself as a special agent made good. But the reason I tell you the story is for years after I retired, I would be approached by vendors in the private sector and say, you know how hard I tried to get to you, and you never took meetings with outside vendors. And I'm always polite, and I said, well, because we always had a process, and you had to get through that process to get to a key decision maker. And one
Sure.
of my rules about making a decision was, do they understand what our culture and context is and what our requirements really are? And oftentimes they did not. So one of the rules I have at NSS is, are we listening to the customers, and can they, I run something called a living lab with my team at my office in Arlington, where customers can come in and actually put their hands on the technology we have developed and have fielded or are developing and getting ready to field. And then we listen, because I don't want my team to ever be presumptuous enough to think we know what everybody needs
Right.
in the community. So let them come in and listen and kick the tires, or as I often make the joke, kick the kiosk, and see, is this what you need to meet your requirement at the speed of threat to your organization or your agency? And
Right.
it's been very valuable. We're not wasting time and money in building something that's obsolete or unneeded. We're actually building things that folks can take and put into practice right away.
That's wonderful. Uh, I mean, it's so needed. Technology, I think the illustrious, I'm not sure, it's not Sir Ernie. I think we clarified that. But Ernie Allen mentioned that very strenuously, that the solution to human trafficking and other heinous worldwide criminality is technology. And he's right, of course, but technology is a very, very expensive things often. And so how do we bridge that economic gap between what we think is going to have impact and how we can afford it?
Well, let me give you a twofold answer to that, Jeff, and that is, you invest in great technology like facial recognition and other kinds of things about behavior, and specifically anomalous behavior detection, which my company does do a lot of. But you also invest in the human capital, that individual, that family member, that police officer, that member of hospitality, everyone across critical infrastructure, as DHS does so very well with their Blue campaign. You enable them with the skills they need to recognize what just doesn't look right, those signals of something wrong that's often hidden in plain sight. Understand what grooming is and what it looks like in person and what it looks like online. And I know we're going to talk about the dramatic upswing in grooming and trafficking when predators move essentially from the bus stop to the laptop or the desktop. And we saw a 120% increase. But let's invest in people, and you do that very well with your foundation to provide them the training that's practitioner driven. So it's done in a way that is understandable, with useful capabilities and tips that they can apply right away within their own families. And I know from over our conversations how often families miss what's right in front of them,
Right.
because they just don't assume it will happen to them. We had a terrific article recently from John Sheehan at NCMEC, and the title of his article was "Not in My Backyard." And the point of his article was, it is in your backyard and it's in everyone's backyard, and you really need to pay attention. So
Yeah.
technology by itself is not the answer. Technology with an educated, informed person is the answer.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of technology, our good friend, Chief Mark Stainbrook, who's now up in Beverly Hills, California, they've invited us up to a hotel securities event coming up sometime next month. But what's interesting is when Chief Stainbrook took over that job up in Beverly Hills, he immediately went to the technology side in real time in his department, and he created a real time working environment. And he started launching drones that are now circulating a good portion of every day throughout the entire city, so that their response time no longer is tens of minutes. It's virtually less than a minute before they're on scene with a drone that's then immediately directing officers to, what's the status, what's going on, what are the suspects, all of the important elements. And then he also upped the number of cameras throughout the city. And the other thing that he did, which is not surprising, but it happens so often, is he took his watch commander's office away from that person and put him right into the real-time environment. So that person is sitting right there while it's all happening, instead of waiting for a supervisor to come and say, "Hey, Captain, guess, this is happening. What should we do about it?" He's right there now. And he had some groanings about that initially, because how that works. But so that's you're right. So he's empowered his people, and he's added technology hand in hand. And so you're right. That's critical to the success of this.
Well, Jeff, I'm an educator as well, and the chief has been through the executive leadership program up at Naval Postgraduate School. And
Right.
he's one of those, as about every leader we have that comes through executive leadership program, top of their game, understands that convergence of technology and human beings, and he puts people in real time. You make better decisions if you're actually seeing the data with your own eyes, and it's not filtered. The higher you are up in an organization, the less likely people want to tell you bad news.
Right.
Better to see it, react to it, and use that as teaching for your personnel. So
Yeah.
I think he's right at the cutting edge, and I applaud his activity there.
Yeah, he's a very progressive guy. Uh, you know, uh, Both educationally and in terms of law enforcement, on connecting with his team, which is critical. So tell me a little bit about Florida. What's going down there in Florida? What's going on? Were you impacted by any of the hurricane or any of the big storms?
Well, the entire state really was. I happen to live in the northeast corner of the state, and we were blessed in the sense that we had some wind and water damage, but certainly not the catastrophic losses that we saw in the west and southwest part of the state. Thankfully, this is a very integrated, responsive law enforcement community. FEMA was here FEMA was here in advance of the storm and the hurricane, and it's still here. And you have volunteers literally from across the United States that came in: police, fire, emergency managers, everybody across the electrical and foundational and critical infrastructure. They just come.
Yeah.
And hotels open their doors, and airlines get people here and people out. So no, it's a state that has been very integrated and works well.
I normally deploy to those events, but wasn't available to deploy to this last horrific storm. Looks like we're going to have many more to come here as the weather's changing. Yeah, for sure. So you and I, we attended the NACP event in Dallas, Texas, with a great number of attendees, a lot of chiefs of police and senior law enforcement, prosecutors and whatnot from around the world. What was your sense of that event?
As they always are, I'm a lifetime member of IACP. Gosh, I've been a member I'll date myself here, but I want to say probably about 35 or 40 years. And I've attended close to that many events or parts thereof with the major city chiefs and also national county sheriffs. As always, and this is the first time really for the mass gathering post COVID. I thought the vibe was very strong. I thought we saw a great enthusiasm and collaboration to be back together. And of
Mhm.
course, in closed sessions or closed sessions within the organization, you hear about the issues that most keep these men and women awake at night. Besides regular crime, it is the
Right.
over scrutiny of policing and condemnation and use of force and the kinds of things that have always plagued policing. But what I came away with was a true sense of the progressive nature of folks wanting to reestablish, in some cases, the respect for what I think is a great profession. The educational sections were fabulous. I was surprised they only had one on human trafficking, given that it's a $150 billion criminal enterprise. I
Yeah.
hope we can change that next year and bring some more awareness. Of course, you had HSI there, and Customs, and TSA, all big players,
Yeah.
incidentally, in the fight.
Yeah, also they only had one very small session on foundations,
Mhm.
on police foundations, which was kind of a shocker for me since it was we almost made it down to New Orleans, except for some weather got in the way and COVID. But yeah, and apparently it's not a money generator for IACP, and so they've been reluctant to allow the foundation segment or cycle to move ahead. So hopefully we'll get some traction on that because, in my opinion, the foundations, they support so many functions that law enforcement is unable to do. I mean, just financially, or perhaps like with the Port of San Diego, they're precluded from actually, reaching out to the community for grants or funding for things outside their core responsibility.
Well,
So
I
yeah.
was just gonna say, Jeff, you don't have a better chance than the fact that IACP is gonna be in San Diego next year.
What
So,
an interesting concept, right? Yeah. So yeah, that's really worth talking about as we move forward. But first of all, I want to talk a little bit about the webinar that you put on. That's I think is just now being released. NEC was the sponsor along with InfraGard. And for my listeners, I'm not sure if people really know what InfraGard is. Maybe you can tell them just a little bit about what InfraGard is.
sure, InfraGard, that I've had the pleasure of being a member for many years and the pleasure of leading it at one point in my career, and when I led it, had 50,000 members. Now I think we have about 80,000. Uh,
Mhm.
there are InfraGard affiliations with all 56 field offices of the FBI. But interestingly, it started in the financial sector when
Mm,
there was a realization that there were cyber threats and others to financial sectors, and banks being very proprietary about interest rates and so forth didn't, and we're talking 20 plus years ago at this point, didn't easily share the information about threats. And the Bureau came in wisely and said, threat to one is a threat to all, and we will not compromise any proprietary information, but we do have to get more people understanding what these threats are. So it started in financial institutions, and now it's spread across critical infrastructure. And it's all volunteer, but for a few paid members on the national board. And I told you the number of members, which is really astounding. And these are men and women on the front lines doing their normal jobs across all elements of critical infrastructure.
mhm, mhm.
But then they converge or they come together in chapters. I believe there's 77. My number might be a little bit off, but it's pretty close to that. They align with, as I said, the 56 field offices, and each of those field offices has a human trafficking, has an InfraGard coordinator and a outreach person, but
Mhm.
also a counter human trafficking coordinator.
Wow. Yeah, it's an astonishing growth. When I was a federal agent with the Treasury Department, that collaboration issue was uh, not alive and well at that time, and there was really a real lack of sharing on most levels. In fact, there was a highly competitive attitude towards brothers and sisters from other agencies. And, you almost had to get a subpoena to get information from someone who was next door to you that was, you know, working on the very same case together or not. It was pretty pitiful, but it has certainly changed now, and that's really a good thing. So this event that you put on, this webinar, maybe you can tell my listeners a little bit about how that transpired and how it came about.
Sure, happy to, and I hope you can share the link. We at NEC decided to partner with InfraGard for all of the right reasons. They are involved in public service. It's a 501c3 that comes together for the greater good. And our main issue was human trafficking. How do we counter human trafficking and that combination of human trafficking and homelessness? So we became a sponsor for InfraGard, which allowed us, aside of the money, which a 501c3 always needs, and we were happy to give, it gave us the opportunity to interact with the members in the different chapters, participate in things like the webinars that you had an opportunity to join in. So the webinar that Jeff is speaking about was Jeff and myself, Mike Lesko, a retired member of public safety from Texas, and then Ernie Allen, the original founder of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, who does just astounding work across the globe.
Amazing.
He's just a tremendous resource. He brought NEC into the We Protect Global Alliance that just passed 100 countries, as Europol, Interpol. I believe we were the 54th global company to join in, and I'm certain that there are over 60 at this juncture. And we did the webinar to really talk through what human trafficking is, what forced labor is all about, what sexual exploitation and childhood sexual exploitation is all about, how it happens, useful opportunities for parents and teachers to recognize something that they may not have seen before, or may not realize that this is, in fact, something that's happening in grooming. And
Right.
Ernie made that point I made earlier about, bus stop to desktop. When we went into this closed world of remote learning and COVID, for all the right reasons to keep people safe, it allowed predators almost an unfettered access.
Yep.
With 120% increase of grooming on common platforms like Facebook and Instagram. And kids are online all day long. In fact, UNICEF put out a stat that said 1 in 3 users of the internet is a child under the age of legal consent.
Right.
Which is pretty frightening.
It is.
So, and then think just for a minute, and we did spend a lot of time on this, it's a $150 billion global enterprise. Yeah. So to that note, and then of course we talked about victim assistance and how to reintegrate folks that probably didn't have any choice in trafficking or being trafficked, but now are looked at as outcasts or criminals, or they're on the street. And that's where we'll sometimes find them in our efforts to combat homelessness. How to restore that dignity, that respect, that belonging, and most importantly, probably with our efforts out in Texas and something called Haven for Hope, it's giving them access to the needed centering again, and then access to medical services and so forth. Getting them reintegrated into society. Surprisingly, a large number of our homeless men and women and their families are United States veterans.
Yeah.
It's frightening as well. Folks that were willing to give all to protect their country are now on the streets of that country.
Yeah.
So
tragic.
So that's another great honor to work for a company that cares about things like that.
So what are the plans for future webinars along those lines or other subjects?
Well, there were a number that spilled out in terms of how to reintegrate a victim back into society, that we should be hosting folks from the Blue Campaign from DHS, understanding what ICE does and HSI does in terms of, and I thought this was smart from a law enforcement perspective. They're going after the supply chain. So not just find that one person that is trafficking a young boy or a girl or a group of folks for forced labor and sexual exploitation, but those that benefit from it, those who benefit from it financially, those who buy goods and services produced by forced child labor.
Right.
That's how you destabilize a criminal enterprise, and that's how you knock it out. You go after the money and you go after every element. It's the same thing as organized crime, and that's what I did a lot of my career as you know, from working in Treasury Department. You go after every part of the supply chain and you take away the funding.
Yeah. It's the heart of criminality is the money. Without the money, there's no incentive. There's a movement afoot legislatively to legalize sexual acts in the state of California. Are you familiar with that at all?
I'm not. There's part of my mind that would go to if this is consensual, regulated, health driven. I'd like to hear the debate.
Yeah, the pros for it are essentially what you're saying. The cons, which are pretty prolific and loud, are that if you legalize this sexual activity, then you basically have licensed the traffickers. You've taken away the criminality from them. You've eliminated some of the prosecutorial elements that exist today that aid law enforcement in capturing and releasing the victims, survivors, and potentially going after the traffickers. So that I think that's the impetus behind the vote against this initiative. But
well, if it were me and I lived in California, I would vote against it, because whatever you'll see on the front end, there'll be an entire criminal enterprise standing up right behind it immediately to exploit it.
Of course.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think any move in that direction is probably, again, I'm not in California and can't vote there, but it's not something that I think makes good sense for a community.
No, it really doesn't. There's another thing that you and I have talked about privately is the normalization of sexual exploitation throughout basically the world, but certainly in the United States. And you see it in places like OnlyFans, that's ONLY fans, which is an app that is frequented a lot by young high school, mostly women. That's predominantly who use it, and they want to chat, and then there's the element there that you can sell photographs of your body. And I had the distinct pleasure of having two high school young women here on my show a while back, and we talked a lot about sexual exploitation and the normalization of it and how it relates specifically to human trafficking potential in the grooming process. Because if you find a young woman that's willing to post her semi-nude or nude pictures online, and they sell those photographs, by the way, or even if it's just to impress their boyfriend or their friends, the traffickers are looking at that already. I mean, they're so far ahead of the game when it comes to technology. What are your thoughts about these kinds of applications or sexual exploitation, the way it's become nationalized in advertisements and movies and television series, I mean, throughout our whole culture?
Jeff, I guess I'd have to put on my educator hat and no, seriously, and make a comment that we lost something when we stopped teaching civics in grammar school and high schools. I remember going through and actually enjoying the civics class because it taught you about people and behavior. And then, of course, look at the career I chose. Right. Well, I think in the loss of that kind of discussion about civics and behavior and respect and so forth, you see a dilution of permissions, and the society's become more permissive.
Right.
And I'm guessing that these young men and women are not thinking forward. It's almost as if they think the old story about, a TV show where somebody is shot or injured, but they're back the next week or the next episode.
Right.
Young people sometimes do not realize the fatality of using a firearm. Well, it's the same thing. A young person who thinks, I'm going to impress my boyfriend, girlfriend, partner,
Mhm.
whatever, to show them this because it's cool,
Right.
don't really realize that they then lose control of that image. That relationship likely, particularly at young ages, is gonna come and go, and then
Mhm.
they have given away a vital part of their privacy that they will not be able to get back. So I
Yeah.
think it's time to have those informed discussions again and around the supper table, and then in the classroom, and reinforce them regularly.
Yeah, we're finding that with our training, with our human trafficking training, our Help Stop Human Trafficking.org training, that often, in particular, the women in the audience, the mothers in the audience, are captured by the training. They're appalled. They learn firsthand that like it's in everyone's backyard.
Yep,
In San Diego County, we have documented cases in every single high school, and it's now migrating down into the middle schools as well. So um, these mothers, very often now I get a phone call back because we make sure that they have our contact information, and they'll say, "Well, this after your session on human trafficking awareness, I went home and I was discussing it with my family, which is a huge you know, check mark in their favor that they're at the dinner table and they are talking about these things. And so, if that's true, then our messaging is working. But well, I'll get calls and they say, my daughter believes she's being groomed, and they're so subtle. That grooming process, as you know all too well, it can take weeks or a year or more. Just depends on the character of the person that they're trying to groom.
indeed.
And yeah, it's pretty amazing. But there are so many things that you and I could talk about for hours, but unfortunately, this is a 30-minute show, and we're drawing to a close here. I want to thank my sponsors, the San Diego Harbor Police Foundation, for allowing me to invite unbelievably impressive people like Dr. Kathleen Kiernan from the NEC National um, group that she heads up as president. I mean, she's all over the map. She's amazing. And thank you so much for finding time to visit with us today, Kathleen.
Of course, thank you for your work. As I said, you had me at the greater good. Look forward to doing this again. We will share that InfraGard webinar and some other resources for the listeners. And as always, if anybody needs anything, ready to help.
Thank you for it. It's great seeing you again. And what are you going to do to get ready for your 60-mile walk?
Well, we're ready. We step off. We'll travel to Dallas next Thursday, and we'll step off on Friday and join about 2,000 others
Wonderful.
trying to make a difference in this world.
You should come to San Diego and do it.
I've actually done San Diego. It
Oh,
about
yeah.
killed me. What people tend to think of San Diego as flat, it's anything but. But I actually may do it in San Diego again next year. The San Diego Police Department was tremendous in terms of their support and engagement with the walkers.
La Jolla Grade is a killer.
Yeah, it was. Yeah,
Walking or riding a bike. I've done it many times.
indeed.
All right, well, it's good to visit with you, Dr. K, and I look forward to seeing you in the very near future.
Very good. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.